I'm Larry Fedoruk, and welcome to another episode of my podcast. I was 8. Stories from my personal journal of that magnificent year growing up in Waukau, Saskatchewan. Timelines bend a little, and some of the names have been changed, but these stories mostly happened as told. I was 8.
Chapter 4. A Kid in a Candy Store.
Our small town had a candy store. What are the odds? I mean, of all the businesses one would choose to set up in a tiny prairie town, why would one choose a candy store? Or maybe it was the perfect idea. Our little town had a bank and a grocery store and a gas station and a movie theater and a feed store, and well, come to think of it, for us kids, the candy store was our feed store. It was called Mamcher's Confectionery. Now, in hindsight, it might have been an early version of a convenience store. As a kid, I wouldn't much be interested in those shelves along the back wall that may have contained cans of soup, loaves of bread, or boxes of noodles. Those memories are vague and cloudy. Distinctly, I remember the counter at Mamcher's Confectionery, and behind the counter on display, an array of every possible candy that existed in my then modern world. Spearmint Leaves, Mojos, Twizzlers, Popeye Candy Cigarettes, Jujubes, Sweet Tarts, Lickamade, which was basically sweet tart powder as far as I knew, Taffy, Jawbreakers, Bubble Gum, all the other gum, chocolate bars, what Americans call candy bars, not to mention a huge cooler which contained not only Coke, Pepsi, 7-Up, Fanta Orange, Fanta Grape, but the exotic choices like RC Cola, Root Beer, Ginger Ale, and Sprite. And in the corner was a small freezer that contained popsicles, fudgicles, drumsticks, ice cream sandwiches, and the orange creamsicle. Oh, beautiful and merciful Lord, thank thee for the bounty of Mamcher's. And if you can foresee it in your benevolence, to provide me with the means to purchase any or all of the bounty held within, I would be forever in your gratitude, and would remain faithful to thine commandments. Amen. Amen. Mamcher's Confectionery was where my and every kid in town's allowance, birthday money, chore earnings, or dimes found on the street was spent. Much of it was penny candy, 2 for a penny, 3 for a penny, and so on. This is where we learned math and budgeting. Say if you had 25 cents, a whole quarter. Well, a pop, a soft drink, was 12 cents. However, 2 of those cents was bottle deposit. Mr. Mamcher, and Mr. was his first name, I believe, said that if you drank the pop at the counter or in front of the store and returned the bottle immediately, he wouldn't even charge you the 2 cents. After that, for example, a popsicle, 8 cents. That means you still had 7 whole cents for 14 spearmint leaves. Say if you had a pop at a chocolate bar, the chocolate bar was a dime, and that left you a nickel. And that was 15 Mojos. Oh, it was dizzying. Maybe that was just the sugar. Now, our parents put limits on what us kids could spend at Mamcher's, so we often prayed for found money. Money they didn't know about. And not just literally finding nickels and dimes on the street, but say, a family gathering after church on a Sunday, when a tipsy uncle would call you over and apologize for missing your birthday and shove a couple of coins into your hand. Immediately, you were off to Mamcher's, jingling all the way. Now, in this case, any candy purchased could not be on your person when you returned home, or hidden in your room where it might turn up as evidence. So all candy had to be consumed on the walk home. If you had a lot of candy, too much for the walk home, you stopped at the schoolyard swings or one street over at the Sliding Rock, where you would just sit there and eat the licorice and candy, achieving a Zen-like status. The other way to buy treats at Mamcher's was hoping that your dad or someone in the family needed cigarettes. Mamcher's was also the tobacconist in town. If you were just a kid like me, you could go in, ask for a pack of cigarettes, say they were for your dad, and Mr. Mamcher would gladly hand them over. Once you got older, Mamcher suspected you might be buying them for yourself and not sell them to you. After all, he did have his standards. If you were sent on the smokes mission, you could always ask for and get to spend the change on yourself, or ask for, an extra bit of money to buy yourself something. Now, also at any point, us kids in town with bags of candy had to be on the lookout for teens. The teens around town, especially a particular group of troublemakers, felt that you should share your candy with them, perhaps even donate it all in return for your own health and safety. After a while, the swings or Sliding Rock were easy pickings for the older kids, so I had to find new places to hide to eat my loot, like behind the bank downtown or sometimes in front of the RCMP headquarters. Because, they wouldn't rob a kid right in front of the cop shop, would they? Later on, as they got more creative, the teens would actually offer to buy you candy. There were a couple of scenarios. A, they would ask you to buy them cigarettes, and they'd pay you a few cents when the job was completed. Just tell old man Mamcher they're for your dad. Hey, his name is not old man, it's Mr. Since Mr. Mamcher trusted me, I was good to pick up a pack. That didn't last long. The brand they wanted was not my dad's brand, and Mr. Mamcher knew that. I didn't have the smarts to say that my dad switched cigarette brands or that it was for my Uncle Mike who was visiting, so basically I was busted. I couldn't even buy smokes for Dad anymore after that. Scenario B. If you were walking by a group of teens, they would stop you and tell you they were too lazy to go down to Mamcher's, and would you go buy them something, a bag of candy, and you would get an extra dime to spend on yourself for your efforts. Sure, what do you want? They would tell you to ask Mr. Mamcher for 50 cents worth of boners. Boners? I never heard of them. Are they new? Yeah, they're new. Now go get some boners. And so it went with me and every other little kid in town, asking Mr. Mamcher for a big bag of boners, or hard-ons, coxicles, ball liquors, sugar pubes, and so forth. Oh, the first few times Mr. Mamcher would lose his stuff, scream at you and tell you to get out of his store. I mean, you weren't banned, but you certainly couldn't go back there for a couple of weeks until things calmed down. I assumed the only joy the teens got out of this was that when you went back to them and told them you were kicked out, they just laughed like hell. Also, they took back all the money, including that dime that was meant for you. After a while, Mr. Mamcher caught on. So when you went in and asked for 50 cents worth of red vaginas, the cherry ones, he would say, "This isn't for you, is it? Who told you to do this?" After you caved, he would fill up a bag with, say, dry macaroni or gravel and tell you to take them back to the kids. He'd give you a pixie stick for your trouble and sent you on the way with specific instructions for the teens. If they have a problem with their bag of treats, you tell them to come see me. They never did. One day, I was walking to Mamcher's with money burning a hole in my pocket, and Mr. Mamcher was not at his post behind the counter. Instead, standing there, blocking my view of the licorice, was a diminutive gray-haired woman thought to be the rarely seen Mrs. Mamcher. Apparently, Mrs. Mamcher knew nothing of the complicated ways of retail confectionery and told me I'd have to wait for Mr. Mamcher, who emerged later from a curtained doorway at the back of the store. As he stood there for a moment, I could see in the back of the store. I noticed a stove and a table with some chairs. Beyond that, there appeared to be a couch and perhaps a TV. I quickly ran outside to survey the entire size of the building. Of course, the building was much bigger than just the confectionery itself. Oh my goodness, they lived in the store. I didn't surmise that they lived in the back of the store or that they divided a place into retail business plus living quarters. In my mind, they lived in a candy store. I didn't even realize that was possible. A whole new realm of fantasy was available to me now. Imagine living in a candy store. I thought maybe that was why Mr. and Mrs. Mamcher had no little Mamchers. You couldn't have a kid living in a candy store. He would eventually die from the candy. But what a deal for Mr. and Mrs. Mamcher, huh? They didn't have to worry about collecting birthday money or finding a dime on the street. Anytime they felt like a big bag of cinnamon hearts, they could just walk to another room in their house and chow down. Wow, luckiest people in town, Mr. and Mrs. Mamcher. My best time ever at Mamcher's came when I was 8, and the Banicki kid went missing. I know that sounds weird, but here's how it went. He was like 4, and he just wandered out of his yard, and that was it. He was gone. I mean, how far could a 4-year-old go in a town of 1,000 people? But he was lost, nowhere to be found. People came out of their homes and formed small groups. They all began walking extended radii from around the Banicki house, yelling, "Jimmy, Jimmy!" He'd been missing for almost 3 hours, and in another couple hours, it would be dark. My friend Richard and I had our bikes, and I said to Richard, "I'll bet he's at the dirt pile," which was just an open dirt area on the other side of town. It was the last street, there was a row of trees, and through there, the dirt pile. Us kids used to bring our Tonka toys there to play construction or mining development or whatever game we came up with. It was a great spot, and mostly only the kids knew about it. Off like a flash, Richard and I were there in minutes. We jumped off our bikes and ran through the trees. So no one was there, but I did notice a little shoe. One little shoe. We picked it up and followed the footprints till they stopped. It looked like whoever was wearing the one shoe had crossed the street. So we did as well and began yelling, "Jimmy, Jimmy!" Mrs. Roenick suddenly wandered out onto her stoop and said, "Are you looking for little Jimmy Banicki? He's inside here playing with my boy. What do you want?" Well, we explained to Mrs. Roenick what happened. She said, "Oh my." She said, I asked Jimmy if his mother knew he was here, and he said yes. Back then, that was good enough. Yeah, I know. How did we live? We quickly re-shoed the kid. I threw him on my handlebars, and we raced back. When they saw us with little Jimmy, the crowd cheered. We were local heroes. They hoisted us up on their shoulders. A band began to play. There were balloons and fireworks. Okay, maybe that part didn't happen. But the crowd was abuzz, and Mrs. Banicki was crying and holding little Jimmy, and then she said, "You're in big trouble now, mister." Well, as things quieted down, we were about to be on our way when Mr. Banicki came out and told us to hold on a minute. He reached into his wallet and said, "You boys deserve a reward," and handed us, drum roll, are you ready? An entire $1. Back in the day, that was paper, folding money, a veritable candy fortune. Green as the spearmint leaves we so craved. Now, it was my idea about the dirt pile, and I found the shoe, and I rode Jimmy back on my handlebars, but there was no discussion. Split 50-50. We were off to Mamcher's like the wind. We had 2 pops each and a chocolate bar. Now, if you remember the complicated economics of penny candy, we still had 20 cents each to combine a huge bag of 3-for-1s, 2-for-1s, and so on and so forth. Oh, glorious sugary day! When Mr. Mamcher asked about our newfound fortune, we related the circumstances. Little lost Jimmy, dirt pile, shoe, handlebars, marching band fireworks, reward. Apparently news of the disappearance had already reached Mr. Mamcher, but not news of his safe return. "You did good, boys," he said, and he went to the back and returned with 2 fudgicles, handing them to us and saying, "On the house." Ooh, I'll tell you, nothing tops a Pepsi, a Fanta, an O. Henry, and a bag of candy like an ice cream treat. Richard and I felt like heroes, like TV detectives. We actually discussed making this our business, being detectives and finding lost kids, even though in the history of our town, Jimmy was the only kid that ever got lost. Well, we were like all the kids in town, dreaming and scheming of ways to get money, not because we wanted to buy toys or bicycles or be rich, but only so that we could go to Mamcher's confectionery. Because all we really ever wanted was just to be kids in a candy store with money.
I Was 8 is a weekly series written, produced, and voiced by Larry Fedoruk. A new episode every Thursday. Share your stories with Larry, or if you like, share Larry's stories with a friend. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Larry Fedoruk, that's Fedoruk, can be reached at larryfedoruk37@gmail.com.